All right, welcome everybody. Welcome to St. John's College. We're very excited to have you all here this evening and to be hosting Citizens for Public Justice. My name is Ryan Turnbull. I work here as the Diocesan Discipleship Developer, which just is a lot of syllables to say I teach theology here. Really happy to have Willard and Diwa here to talk about this new book. I'm on the board for CPJ, so it's been really kind of cool to see this come to fruition and be out in the world. Here at St. John's College, we actually have a research center on settlement issues headed by Laurie Wilkinson, who is like a world-leading scholar in all things to do with migration. She wasn't able to be here tonight, but she sends her regrets. She's in Germany, being very important somewhere. So, but she bought a book. So I'm very happy to have you all here. We'll begin with land acknowledgement, and then I'll pass things over to Willard to get us kicked off. So we'd like to acknowledge that this is that we're here in the traditional lands of the Cree, the Anishinaabe, and the Dakota people in the homeland of the Red River Métis. And this college has its roots all the way back in the origins of the Red River colony here, and has educated people in this part of the world from the 1800s, early 1800s on, including some of the first Indigenous clergy in the Anglican Church of Canada, notably Henry Budd. And so we try to continue that tradition here, opening up space for people from all over who come to Winnipeg to study. And in our dorms, we actually have quite a lot of international students. We call this place home. So welcoming people and trying to be a place that holds lots of good relations has been part of what St. John's has tried to be for a long time. Even when we failed at it. Over to Willard.
All right. Well, thank you. Thank you all for coming here, being here this evening and online as well. My name is Willard Metzger, and I'm the Executive Director at Citizens for Public Justice. And a bit of an introduction to CPJ, which we're known as lovingly Citizens for Public Justice. It's over 60 years old, and it started as an organization driven by Christian values, by Christian motives, but really is right from the beginning, 60 years ago, committed to working with anybody interested in the common good. And quite frankly, I keep saying that makes it that we want to work with anybody. And we think that everybody should be interested in the common good, so we would like to work with everybody. So we focus on 3 areas of federal policies. And so we're a lobby advocacy charity based in Ottawa. And our 3 areas are refugee migrant rights, which is why we are here with this book launch, and climate justice, and eradicating poverty in Canada. As a charity, we're membership based, so which is important as a lobby organization to be able to say to MPs, elected officials, that there are more and more Canadians that are aligning themselves with these values and with the concerns that we're articulating. So if you're interested, we have brochures on a little piece on how to become a member, but that's become an important piece for us to be able to show elected officials that these concerns matter to Canadians. So we focus on the elected officials, that's about half of our time, and the other half is also public education. So we focus on those that are elected, that have the power to be able to change and direct policy. And then we focus on those that elect those people into position so that they are demanding the right kind of things from policymakers as well. So it's an organization that is across Christian expression, work with many unions as well. So a very broad spectrum, and yeah, delighted to be here. So the book is been a long time in the making. And published by McGill Queen's University. And when they first looked at it, they put it through a peer review, which is fairly common. But after that first peer review, they said this really needs to go through a second peer review. And not every book would be would be allocated for that. But making it go through the second peer review, and it went through that very successfully, it meant then that it became awarded all the publishing costs. So that was a great thing. But it delayed the book by another full year. And so that had some of the writers, when you picked up a book, you'll see it's got 11 different authors, 11 different chapters written by different people, looking at refugee migrant voices. And so it's either the voice of lived experience or those that work very closely with lived experience. And that's actually what set the manuscript apart, that gave McGill such an interest, because adding lived experience, the voice of lived experience, into this academic rigor set it apart. And McGill said this is an important contribution to their whole refugee migrant series. So we're very proud of this book. It was put together by Emilio Rodriguez, who was our former staff, but now he's gone on to work for the Canadian government. And so he would love to be a part of all these, but no longer available for that. But he put a lot of energy into this, a lot of blood, sweat, and tears. And it really is, it is an excellent read. I think you'll love it. And I think part of what you'll find too is some surprise, some disappointing surprise. Some of the firsthand accounts that you'll read in the book, you're gonna think, oh, that doesn't happen in Canada, does it? But it does. These are real life accounts, some of these stories, and this is what's happening in Canada. And so it's an alarming book. It's a disturbing book as well. But the vision of the book, the aim is to reimagine what Canadian immigration policies would look like if they were based on human rights and informed by lived experience. The book inspires readers to better understand and support the movements working to uphold the rights and dignity of refugees and migrants in Canada. So as I said, I think you'll find this to be a very enjoyable book. I like it because as a busy person, it's not like there's a plot that you have to remember. As 11 different chapters, you can lay it down and pick it up again, and it's one chapter at a time. It works very, very well for that. So I'm very delighted to have been a part of a lot of these book events. And we do try and take different authors at each of the events that we're at. So then each event has a different flavor. Now, we don't have a Manitoba author, but we do have somebody tonight that works with Migrati Manitoba. And we're very delighted to have that guest speaker here to bring to life some of the stuff that you would read in the book as well. And one of the authors is with Migrati Alberta, and so there will be a lot of similarities. So I'm delighted to hear to have Diwa Marcelino. He is a community and labor organizer with 25 years of grassroots experience at local and national levels based in Treaty 1 territory. With Migrati Manitoba, he advances Filipino migrant rights while supporting broader struggles for democracy and justice. During the pandemic, he worked as an essential worker while co-leading migrant worker organizing and relief efforts and community relief, contributing to peer-reviewed research on healthcare barriers facing temporary foreign workers, and co-founding Healthcare for All Manitoba. He currently serves as interim chairperson of the Council of Canadians and is a board member of Kairos. He is a third-class power engineer in food processing and public health care. So I know you are going to really enjoy the presentation that Diwa has prepared for you. And then afterwards, we'll have some time for Q&A as well. So jot down your questions or things you want some more clarity on, or things that you would just like to discuss further. We'll have time for that. So please join in welcoming Diwa.
Yay. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for coming to this launch, the Manitoba launch of the Renewed Canadian Welcome. I was asked to be here to speak with Peter Noteboom, one of the authors and a friend of mine that I've known for over 13 years. Unfortunately, he's not here today, so you're stuck with me. I'll begin by just should I be advancing my own or?
Yeah.
Presentation. Yeah, I see on the screen. Oh, okay. So I'll start with a very solemn piece of information. On April 28th, this year was the National Day of Mourning, as it is every year. And Migrants Manitoba highlighted the life of a worker who died just this year. They want to talk a little bit about John Patrick Usala. This post was made on our social media with the consent and the input of the family of John Patrick. I know that he was a very loved father, brother, friend, cousin, and his life was cut short. Just a few months ago, when I was visiting his family, I was able to speak to his wife and daughters and to really understand more about John Patrick Usala, because even though this case is incredibly rare, unfortunately, it still happens every year. We find workers who die on the job, and specifically migrant workers. We know in Canada and elsewhere in the world, migrant workers often do the 3D jobs: difficult, dangerous, and dirty jobs, they call it, or sometimes it's called other names. But the 3D jobs, many of the jobs that migrants take are jobs that other folks with status, like permanent resident status or Canadian citizenship status, might not want to take. And because of that, there are a lot of issues in the workplace. We often see workers being exploited directly by their employer, or sometimes workers self-censor and, for instance, work with an injury because they're afraid to complain, or they're afraid to file a workers' compensation board case because they feel that their immigration is in jeopardy. They feel that their family is in jeopardy. On one occasion when I visited the family, it really hit me on the way home. After talking to the family of John Patrick Usala, I was driving back from a small town in southern Manitoba on Highway 75, Pembina Highway, and I was really disturbed because all I could hear was just silence on the road. And after hearing this horrific experience, I wanted to scream. I wanted to just express my despair. So for a moment in time, I was really choked up and really hurt that this travesty could happen here. And it seems like life just goes on and the world moves on. And cases like John Patrick Usala's case, we never learn from. But then I also think about my friends in the movement, the migrant justice movement, the folks who are in this book. There are 11 authors in this book. I know a few of them, actually, 3 or 4 or 5 of them. And it always reminds me that the fight for justice in migrant justice cases and the migrant justice movement, the many organizations, for instance, the organizations that make up the Migrant Rights Network, the largest alliance of migrant justice organizations, are there fighting. And when I when I read parts of the book, I think I only was able to read about 4 chapters. I was reminded again by the many years and decades of collective work that has taken place. My friend Peter Nopel, in his chapter, talk about the decades of work that the church has done to highlight the cases of migrants, bring those cases to justice, whether it be in the provincial or in the Supreme Court, like the court case of Singh versus Government of Canada, or the Immigration Canada, where the court case had to prove that migrants were just like every one of us, and they deserve to have charter rights. Because when the charter says everyone, the word everyone, has a right to such and such, or everyone has a right to this, the government of the time did not interpret that as everyone as being with everyone that was migrant workers were included. So we had to go to court to prove that migrants are part of everyone. And that's one example from the book that I thought was very telling. So the case of John Patrick Osala, and I'll go further about other cases that we're working on in campaigns, is another sad story and reminder, and also it gives us incentive, and it gives us impetus to keep working on the justice for migrant workers, and migrants like refugees, because the policies that we make, whether it's provincial policies involving labor, whether it's cuts to legal aid, whether it's cuts to settlement services, whether it's laws that benefit employers more than workers, whether it's legislation on unions, whether it's legislation on the statute of limitations for workers when they can file cases. All of these affect the human lives and lives of loved ones of migrant workers, like the daughters of John Patrick. So again, I'm Diwa Marcelino. I've been working with migrant worker organizations formally since 2001, so exactly 25 years. But prior to that, from 97 to 99, I was also working with an organization in my younger years, when I had a lot of hair, when I wasn't so stressed out. So I've been working with migrant workers for a long time. I remember meeting the Minister of Immigration, Eleanor Kaplan, in the 1990s, and that was my first meeting with the immigration minister. And I was really shocked to hear that the stories that we were telling the immigration minister about the issues concerning migrant workers, the experiences they had, and she did not want to hear about it, but also she was telling us how Canada is such a welcoming place for migrants, and it's just a few bad employers or a few bad apples that are causing these issues. Fast forward 30 years later, I know it's not a few bad apples, because the system itself produces this exploitation. The system itself, the laws that govern us, the policies that dictate upon us are the ones that causes these inequities. So Migrante is in Manitoba, it's everywhere in Canada, from BC all the way to Quebec. We don't have a chapter in the Northwest, in the territories, or in Saskatchewan, but I think we're working on one in Saskatchewan. We have about 200 chapters globally in 63 countries, I believe. But I can't keep count, because we are constantly growing, and we have more chapters, especially in the States. And we fight for the rights and welfare of many Filipinos, because that's where we are based, or our constituency is. But we work with all migrants of all nationalities. And we also look to the root causes of forced migration. So that's why we are involved in democracy, justice, and peace issues in the Philippines, which inevitably sometimes comes back to Canada, because Canada is very much part of the Philippines. Just this month alone, the Canadian Air Force, the Canadian Navy, and other parts of the Canadian military were in the Philippines doing war games and war exercises with Japan and the United States. And we had an event, which I'll talk about in just a minute, where a farm leader was saying that whenever the missiles are being fired, whenever the military is occupying land and sea, it takes away the rights of fisher folk, takes away the rights of farmers who are being dispossessed of that land. And that's nothing to say of even the other dispossession that happens with Canadian mining in the world, which is unfortunately quite egregious, and where Canada, unfortunately as well, is a leader in mining. And many of the human rights issues that arise from the environmental and the political and the militarization surrounding these mines often affects Indigenous peoples, including Indigenous peoples of the Philippines, which then lead to forced migration. So it is full circle, and the type of organizing that we do really speaks to the type of campaigns we need to do, not just siloed campaigns, but really fulsome campaigns that look at the broader picture of inequity in this world. So we do rights and welfare programs. We do have campaigns and advocacy. Willard talked a little bit about our education and research, and we do international solidarity. So Canada's Temporary Foreign Worker Program has been around for decades. We know that many workers are coming to Canada on a temporary basis more and more. Gone are the days where the majority of folks come through permanent residence or permanent nation building streams. Many workers now, or most of them now, come through temporary means. And especially last year and this year, we know that there's a real squeezing of these immigration streams. So less and less folks, for instance, in the caregiver program, caregivers have been coming here from internationally for decades. And now there's only 2 streams of caregivers that come. And they allow only 2,750 workers each year on each of those 2 streams to apply. Once they open up that stream online through the immigration website, it only takes hours for that to be filled up. And there are tens of thousands of people waiting to become a permanent resident. And in that time, they either get deported because they lose their work permit, or they have to find another work permit, another temporary work visa. And this is where we find exploitation, because when the Temporary Foreign Worker Program states you can only work for one employer, it's much more difficult to complain. It's much more difficult to take your break, to take your full lunch, especially if you live with your employer. In the case of caregivers, there's lots of abuses, lots of pay equity issues, and there's also human rights issues. So at Migrante, what we try to do is we work with the whole community. We work with the migrant themselves. I myself am not a migrant. I came here during the dictatorship of Marcos Sr., the president of the Philippines. He enacted a labor export policy because of the graft corruption that was going on. He was able to really bring the economy down to its knees in just a decade or 2. So there was a lot of outward migration. So that's where I come from. In the work that Migrante does, we try to engage different communities. We work with unions. We work with church groups a lot. Migrante Canada also tries to find associations to affiliate with so that we can empower workers. There are a number of things that we do, but the one thing that separates us from different organizations is we always want migrant workers to lead themselves. So I'll just elucidate in a few slides how the migrant workers themselves fight for their rights, go to court themselves if need be, how we are able to train the migrant workers in their rights, and also how to learn from migrant workers. It's a circle, and many of the things that I've learned throughout the years are from migrant workers and their the way that they've been able to fight for their rights, and it's very inspiring. This is one of the events that we do. I'm really happy to have Karen Hamilton, who worked at the Occupational Health Center, who trained migrant workers in Migrante, Manitoba, to do rights workshops for provincially regulated workers, which is about 90% of workers. The rest are federally regulated. In these workshops, we learn about 3 basic rights: the right to participate, the right to refuse work, and the right to know. And there's also another one, the 4th one that was recent.
Right to protection.
The right to protection. Thank you. And the right to protection is very important because we know that a lot of workers are fired when they complain, even when they don't complain, when they're sick. So the right to protection is a right that is enshrined in provincial and federal law, and we often use that. The book, A Renewed Welcome, talks about the different cases that have happened, that have shaped our advocacy and our legal fight for rights. And the right to protection is something that we often have to fall back on because workers lose their jobs just for simply complaining or talking about their health and safety at work. So workshops like rights workshops are extremely important, and they're led by the migrants themselves within the communities that they work in. And once they're trained, they go out to their communities and do formal and informal workshops. So it's a real shame that this program was axed after 25 years, after decades of service. But we still do these workshops without the funding, although maybe in a less frequent manner. But the policies that are xenophobic right now in this country and other countries, the legislation like Bill C-12, the Stronger Immigration Enforcement Act or something to that effect, really feeds off and feeds the xenophobia that's happening against migrants. We are told that migrant workers and migrants and immigration is the reason why our cost of living is going up, the reason why our housing is going up, the reason why our groceries are more expensive. Unfortunately, that's not completely true. The Citizenship and Immigration Canada conducted a study on immigration and its effect on housing. And its own report, I believe, was it 2 years ago or very recently, showed that the majority of price increases was not any way attributed to immigration. Things like developers, the rules around zoning, and other issues totally unrelated to immigration were more of an effect to the housing prices than immigration. And so we know that this rising xenophobia against migrants that is in society and also in legislation, unfortunately, causes issues. Like in Peter Noteboom's chapter talked about the fight for rights for refugees and refugee claimants. Now we know that with this Bill C-12 that was passed by the Parliament, passed by the Senate, we know that workers or refugee claimants who come here have only 14 days now to file a complaint. And if they don't file within that time limit, they are sent back. For instance, if they're coming from the States, it's even worse because it's a safe third country agreement. If they're coming from the States, I'm not an expert in refugee law, but even within that 14 days, they can be sent back to the States. There's only very few exceptions where claimants will not be sent back. So this is a downgrade, a setback, if you will, of the type of work that churches and I'm sure the work of Citizens for Public Justice have been doing for decades, and it's been rolled back. It was very not surprising, but during the pandemic, migrant workers again felt the brunt of this of COVID-19. migrant workers and racialized communities were exponentially, I would say, at risk and received COVID more than the general population. Migrant workers were also the ones who were actually, either lost their jobs because many workers who are in the hospitality, tourism sector, they lost their jobs because businesses were shuttered. And at the other end, many workers were forced to work, like Manitoba's meat producing and meat processing facilities. And this is where we know that in the States and also in Canada, where so many of the outbreaks occurred. In Manitoba, the largest outbreak and the outbreak that started the pandemic more formally in Manitoba happened at a meat plant in Brandon. Because of the close quarters during work, the lack of social distancing, and also the lack of facilities for washrooms and for having lunch and breaks. We know this all contributed to people who got sick, and eventually some of them even died. Again, the policies that we enact, the advocacy that we fight for is very important, because in times of need and trouble, like what happened during the pandemic, the people on the margins are the ones who suffer, and many of those people are migrant workers. This is a photo of Rico Mandolotto. He, at the time in 2021, I believe when this photo was taken, we were fighting for healthcare for migrant workers and for international students, which was cut in 2016, I believe. And he worked at a meat processing facility, and later became part of Migrante and became a leader. And he's quite outspoken for migrant rights. A program that we did during the pandemic, which was very successful, and we were able to meet thousands of workers in Manitoba. I believe over 1,200 to 1,500 workers we were able to meet, was Kapit Bisig. In Tagalog, my language in the Philippines, it means linking arms. And during the pandemic, we basically set up mutual aid societies for those workers who didn't have any food because they did not have access to employment insurance because they didn't have enough qualifying hours. They didn't have access to CERB because they didn't have enough, they weren't citizen or permanent residents. So they had access to no social supports. They lost their income, they lost their jobs. And we were hearing these workers, they didn't have enough food, they didn't have enough money. I know some of them were just scrounging around for rice and eggs, but even that was hard. So we decided to set up this program across Canada, and we distributed groceries from our own pockets. We distributed jackets from our own backs. I gave away a lot of the jackets that outgrew or shrunk in the wash. Later on, with the help of a lot of community activists, we were able to get funding from the federal government, and we were able to, on the weekend, bring groceries to different communities all over southern Manitoba. Even in the north, we were able to send gift cards. Just looking at my time here. When I was delivering these goods on the weekend, I would always, again, see the juxtaposition between these workers that were delivering basic food, canned goods, bananas, rice. And then at the time, I was working at a national courier company, and I was delivering in a very affluent area. Actually, I was delivering to the Premier of Manitoba on a weekly basis. On the weekends, I would deliver eggs, rice, instant noodles. And on the weekdays, I was delivering in a very affluent area. I was delivering robots, swimming robots for people's pools. Because they could not get workers to come and do their lawns and do their household chores, they were buying these robots and all sorts of fancy gadgets. So I was in the middle of these two worlds, helping the fairly privileged to live their life during a very difficult time, but also helping workers who almost had nothing. And that shows that we live in two worlds, that there are rights for some and privileges for some, and for others, they're simply forgotten. forgotten by policy, by society. And that's why I'm very happy, and I was reminded by the book, and when I see the work of the different authors, the different organizations that are representative and authors of this book, I don't have that long despair that I had when I was on that road trip back home from the worker's family, because I know that the fight is still going on, and there are other workers and other organizations who are carrying out that fight. This is one of the organizations I was talking about, which was started by the first chairperson, Karen Hamilton. I'm the co-chair of Healthcare for All now, and as I said before, we're fighting for the rights for migrants, international students who don't have healthcare. Migrants who have a work permit of less than 12 months do not get healthcare. International students do not get public healthcare. They can apply for private healthcare, but we know that there's so many exemptions from that. Prenatal and postnatal and labor and delivery, for instance, or people when they're giving birth, is often not covered. There are some policies that cover it, but it's not universal. Even visiting a doctor is not as simple for migrant workers or international students, because they often have to worry about how much this will cost, if the insurance will pay them back, if they will do it right away. So these are some, we had a press conference in 2024, and we had one this year as well, last year, I mean, and we had a big rally at the legislative. Again, during this time, if we weren't busy enough working, most of migrant, or all of migrant, I would say, are volunteers like myself. We have our day jobs. Some of us work 6 days a week, but on the weekends when we don't have enough time, we do research and advocacy. So during this time, we had a project that was funded by the government, and it also was covered by CCPA, and it talked about the COVID-19 healthcare barriers. And also another project that we had was Justice for Migrant Workers, Home Care Workers in Manitoba, where we studied the effects of the pandemic on home care workers, who are often racialized workers themselves too. This is one of the brighter stories that we have. These workers were fired from their jobs in Thompson at a very well-known hotel. They came to Migrante because they went to employment standards, and employment standards says they couldn't help them get their money back for the illegal recruitment fees because it was past 6 months. Also, they went to other organizations to try to help, but there was a lot of there's a lot of services for migrant workers that are not funded. So many organizations like Settlement Services sometimes have to do this pro bono or at the side of their desk, because many services are not available to migrant workers anymore. These services change from time to time, but a lot of workers, even if there are services, they're still afraid to reach out to get services. These workers were able to file a case at the Labor Board, and eventually they won. And this year, I'm very happy to announce, I believe it was April, that they won most of the money back from their workplace. Unfortunately, they weren't able to get all the money, and about over 50% of the workers who were involved in this case and who were fired were not able to get their money. So this is a sliver of justice, but it is a win that we want to celebrate. I talked about international solidarity and the roots of forced migration. This is an event that we hosted at the First Mennonite Church just not too long ago. And this is Danilo Ramos. He's the president of the National Farming Organization in the Philippines. He's actually having another event here on May 30th in collaboration with the National Farmers Union and the Chilean Association of Manitoba. And he's talking about the situation in the Philippines, especially the human rights situation in the Philippines, and how Canadian policy, the Canadian military, and also private companies are wreaking havoc, especially with Indigenous peoples in the Philippines. If you want to know more about it, please take a look at Migrante's Facebook site or website. We'll have an event at the end of the month, and it'll show you the links between Canadian policy and the human rights abuses in the Philippines. The Coles notes of it is the Canadian government pays for much of the infrastructure that businesses need, like mining companies. They pay through our taxpayer dollars. They pay for the infrastructure that de-risks these private companies' profits. When the companies are able to take the profit, they're able to use the military, paramilitaries, and they're able to, really sometimes make super profits at the expense of the environment, at the expense of human rights, at the expense of labor rights. And at the end of the day, the Canadian taxpayer foots the bill and doesn't get most of it back. I'd just like to finish with this analogy and with this Japanese quilt work and mending work that I saw. It's called boro. It's a traditional Edo period clothing mending process and phenomenon. It was during the 17th and 19th centuries very prevalent, where families would mend their clothing because the price of cotton was so high, especially for the Japanese in the north where there was no cotton. And when I saw this was at the museum. I think it was the International Quilt Museum. It made me think about this book, and I've only been able to read a few chapters, but it reminded me of the strength of having multiple partners, multiple organizations, multiple activists working together. In this quilt, the quilt is patched with many patches, sewn and resewn, sometimes cut, double stitch, and the redundancy in this artwork really reminds me of our movement, the movement of workers, the movement of churches groups, unions, activists, associations, concerned citizens. Our movement is like this quilt work, and I don't want to call it a patchwork, but I believe it's the collective design of this work makes this piece of garment stronger. And the collective work that we do as organizations, as concerned citizens, makes the work stronger. And it's a beautiful piece of work, just like our movement is beautiful. And I'd like to thank the Citizens for Public Justice for inviting me to speak, to talk a little bit about the work of Migrante. And I'm honored to be in the presence of the authors who I really love and respect for all the years and decades of work.
Thank you. Why don't we stay up here
Okay.
and have question and answer time? Thank you for your input. Appreciate that, and the many stories I'm sure you could tell over the 25 years of work that you've been engaged in. I was your very first slide. I was quite shocked by the one statement you had there on that first slide. 8,000 Filipinos migrate or leave
Every day.
every day.
Yes.
Every day. So help us understand what's the driver of that? What causes that to happen?
So it happens because it's a policy of the government of the Philippines. Because the government of the Philippines, and through Marcos really, he stole about $8 billion to $10 billion of wealth from the Philippines. At that time, it was a tidy sum. It is still a tidy sum now. And he basically stole from the coffers of the government, so they couldn't pay for their bills. So there was a lot of social unrest. The inflation rate rose so high because he kept printing money. And if you remember, his partner, his wife, Imelda Marcos, is famous for having like 3,000 shoes. They had, I think they had, if it wasn't Picasso, but they had one of the the greats paintings, and they had gold bars. They basically had all the riches and bankrupt the country for their profit. So the act of forced migration is enacted in policy. It also happens in reality because of the lack of jobs. The Philippines is really heavily militarized. It's actually an extremely rich country. Its wealth has they have gold, copper, chromium, just the mineral wealth that comes out of the country alone is enough to feed the whole nation. It has very fertile lands, being an archipelago and having volcanic islands. Just one of the islands, one of the large islands there, Mindanao, has enough food to feed the country 4 times over, I believe. And yet the country goes hungry. The fishermen go hungry, the farmers go hungry. The people that give the food to and export that food all over the world are the ones going hungry. So the answer is by design, workers leave and so that they can fend for themselves, but it's designed systematically so that they can bring down foreign currency to pay for the debts because of the corrupt management of the country.
We have a question on the chat. How often is Migrante Manitoba called upon to assist Filipino healthcare workers?
Especially during the pandemic, we would receive calls almost daily. There are workers who, because there was a stat I believe in the States, and he talked about Filipino nurses. You may not know, but I think the Philippines is very famous for many things. One of them is their nurses. We export nurses by the 1,000. I don't know how many nurses are part of the 8,000 a day, but there's a significant amount. And nurses, for many reasons, during the pandemic, I believe, even though they were a minority compared to other nurses in terms of total numbers, Filipino nurses especially, died from COVID at rates several times higher than other nurses. So we know that that's because they're usually on the front lines. A lot of their nursing background in the Philippines, they become de-skilled. So for instance, they may be, if they were in Canada for the whole tenure of their service as a nurse, they might be, let's say, a head nurse, or they might be a nurse that does more policy work, or other kinds of nursing jobs available to nurses. But because they come here through the Canadian immigration and through the ways that we hire nurses in Canada and even the States, they're usually relegated to the lowest seniority positions. And that's where they have more contact with people. And that's why during the pandemic, especially, we heard from them daily, sometimes, especially workers who contracted the disease. And at that time, we didn't even have all the necessary PPE. So the pandemic was really a time where we saw how these inequalities really magnified during this time, and it resulted in a lot of sickness and death.
Any other questions, comments?
At one point, you mentioned the federal provincial regulations, and you mentioned a stat about how many migrant workers are under provincial versus federal. Was that again 80-20, or is it?
That was for all workers in general. For instance, I work in agribusiness, so I'm federally regulated. So if you're working in banks, telecommunications, transport that involves intra-provincial transport, seeds, did I say banking or financial services? Those are federally regulated. So they, for instance, workers, we had some workers earlier last year during Christmas who were fired, 19 of them. They worked for a trucking company who fired them and then promised their jobs to another 20 or so Filipinos waiting to come and replace them. They're federally regulated. So they're part of the 10%. So it's not just migrant workers, but all workers in Manitoba, 90% of all workers are provincially regulated, and then 10% are federally regulated. So there is some slight differences.
So here in Manitoba, what's the network of sort of migrant refugee advocacy organizations? There's got to be a whole patchwork and network.
Well, I was originally, for many of the years that I did migrant justice work, I was in Ontario and in Toronto specifically. And there I found that there was a lot of organizations specifically working on migrant justice issues. In Manitoba, there's not so much. I know that we have some folks here from the settlement services, and they're part of CCR, the Canadian Council for Refugees, and they do also work there to uplift the rights and welfare of migrant workers. But in terms of like political organizations or charities or real organizations that look solely on the rights issues and advocate for them at a political level. There are very not as much as other places. And also, it's related to the amount of migrant workers here. The migrant workers in other countries, in other provinces, sorry, are in the tens of thousands. Like Ontario and Alberta at one point had almost 100,000 each. In Manitoba, we only have several thousand, a few to several thousand.
Manitoba does a fair bit of the advocacy, kind of like coordinating, does it not?
Yeah, so the Manitoba Association for Newcomer Service Organizations, they actually deal with a lot of work cases. And they receive a lot of casework from migrant workers. But unfortunately, even their funding has been not always 100%. So sometimes I'll give you, for instance, sometimes we have a migrant worker who comes to us. I'll send them to, let's say, a legal aid center or a place for help in the city, and that's part of Manso. And they'll come back and they said they're not eligible for a service. I could call them again and say, can you really help this person? And maybe they will help. But the reality is that sometimes because of funding, they're not able to help. And this is even in the city of Winnipeg, where there's a lot of agencies. So then it comes back to organizations like Migrante, and we're not a funded agency. We all work most of us work full-time and part-time. So it's really difficult. That's why there's really a need for more advocacy and policy justice groups for migrants and refugees.
What organizations do lobbying at a federal level, like CPJ, Kairos?
CCR would as well, the Canadian Council of Refugees, yeah.
Migrant Rights Network.
Yeah, the Migrant Rights Network is made of migrant organizations. They're the largest alliance. They also do a lot of that. But even with all the organizations that we have, and even through Manso's, the settlement services who are part of CCR, even with all our advocacy for years, we can see that all wiped out in just the first year of Mark Carney's prime ministership. Decades of work just gone. So the work continues, and we do have to build ourselves. We have to get stronger. We have to get more vocal, and we need to do things like this. This book is a wonderful example of the type of work we need to do. Academic work, research, writing, all the different disciplines are needed. The workers who fight for their rights, who go to rallies and protests, all these make that fabric, like I showed you, from the Edo period. It makes the fabric stronger.
We have another online question. What are some of the current calls to action for justice for migrant workers? How can people get involved in advocacy right now?
I would say some of the calls right now is before it was passed in, I believe, March this year, we were trying to call a stop to the Bill C-12. Change its name before, the Enforcing Immigration, something Stronger Immigration Act or something like that. The act that was passed in March by Parliament, the Senate, that really forfeits the rights of even refugees, for instance. And the book will talk about the huge gains we have made in refugee settlement, refugee rights, even basic rights, like being accorded the rights of a person under the Canadian Charter of Rights, which is unfortunately not a given. Those are some of the things we're fighting for now, because even though we've made gains in the past, and I know the churches have been quite involved. I'm also on the board of Kairos, and migrant rights is one of our pillars of campaigns next to Indigenous reconciliation and rights work and environmental work. A lot of the setbacks that have happened have meant that we are still fighting for the basic rights that we were fighting for all along. Just to get workers, for instance, who become pregnant to get prenatal care or to get their labor and delivery covered is a fight that we're still fighting to this day. In Ontario, migrant workers who want to unionize, but they're working in the farm program, the Seasonal Agricultural Workers Program, we do not have the legal right to unionize. Rights that we've enjoyed as citizens for maybe over 100 years, like the right to overtime. There are many Manitoba farms where workers can work 14 hours a day, 7 days a week for weeks on end. They don't have overtime. So I always talk about having two worlds. Migrant workers live in another world than us. Their privileges, their rights, they're not something that we can take for granted because they don't have the same rights as us. And even if they have those rights on paper, like the book says, there are many barriers, physical, political, thank you, legislative barriers that make it very hard for workers to even enact or live out the rights that they have, even if they have it, it's very difficult. So join an organization. The migrantrights.ca is an organization that Migrante Canada proudly helped start up. They have a great website, migrantrights.ca. I would encourage folks to take a look at that. Take a look at your local organizations, like my organization, Migrante, and other organizations where you're from. There's always something to do. Send us an email, look us up. We'll have something for you to do. If it's art, you can help us make posters. If it's calling, you can help us call. If you have a computer and you know how to write, you can help us write affidavits for workers who need to tell their story.
You had highlighted healthcare for all, that was to be an action, status for all, another piece that both CPJs involved with those as well, but those are critical. And just to bring some of that again to just clear sort of examples of that. So if a worker would get pregnant, then there's a real chance that they'll lose their job.
Yes.
Because of that, and then get sent home. They have no choice.
We had a worker that my friend Karen helped me with in rural Manitoba. She was fired and she was very pregnant. She would have gone home, but the airlines wouldn't accept her. So we were saved by the airlines because they have lawyers, and if something happens to that child or the woman on that airplane, then they're liable. But it's very sad and very disgusting that our own government would allow that to happen. And it would be the airline's lawyers and policy to prevent something like that happening. So yeah, we have a long way to go, even with helping people with the basic of rights, the basic of health services, and the basic of workers' rights, like even overtime and health and safety gains that we've made that they unfortunately can't take advantage of.
So do temporary foreign workers, do they pay income tax?
Yes, income tax, CPP, EI, every tax deduction you have, they have it too.
So they get their wages are taxed, and with that, they get health care access then too, right?
If a worker has a permit, a visa of less than a year, they do not.
They do not. They pay for it,
They pay for it for sure.
but they don't get it.
If
They
they
don't-
have
they're
a
not
permit of
able to
over
receive
a year, they should get it. But again, like the book says, there are barriers that are non-legislative that prevent workers. For instance, if a worker, I was just talking to a worker, he was injured and he's very hesitant to file a claim because he knows a coworker who was injured was unfortunately fired after the injury for another reason. But if enough workers are fired after they receive an injury, it gives a chilling message to the other workers. And it says, okay, maybe you have those rights, but it's on you if you want to enact those rights. So it only takes a few examples at a workplace where people will know that if they try to have their rights enabled, they will be punished. And unfortunately, there are so many things that we do. And I know that my friend here from the settlement agency, we call them and talk to them every week for workers who are applying for open work permits for vulnerable workers. It's an actual stream of a visa that was enacted because of the thousands and thousands of cases of abuse. Again, it's not a few bad apples. The system produces this exploitation because the asymmetric power imbalance that the employers have over their workers that force them to work in unsafe conditions, force them to work sometimes with their pay being deducted. We had a worker here in Winnipeg who, after he got his paycheck, the supervisor would go to the ATM with him and remove 90% or 95% of his pay. Fortunately, we got an organization that helps workers. He was able to get, I believe, $60,000+ of this. But he said to me during the time where they were taking his pay, he didn't have enough to eat, and he was a supervisor himself at a gas station in Winnipeg, and he was getting his money stolen. And when he went to employment standards, we tried to get him to go to the press about this, but the employment standards told them that if he, according to him, apparently, allegedly, they said that if he went to the press, he might not get his money back. So even though that case was of public importance that we could have used to sway policy, it was again hidden so that the system continues to rejuvenate itself and continues to exploit workers.
So closed workers work permit is that you're only assigned to one employer. You get your permit, but that employer only. So open would be that you could get a job, a temporary worker in different places, right?
That's right.
So what percentage would be closed work permits and what percentage would be open? Do you know?
Under the temporary foreign worker program, there's also another program called the International Mobility Program. It's usually higher waged. The low wage sector, though, the temporary foreign worker program, I believe the majority of that work is closed permits. There has been some minor changes, specifically to the caregiver program, where workers can come as permanent residents if they apply, but that's the exception and not the rule. And even that, when I talked about the caregivers, they have a very hard time getting the permanent residence. There are some workers who have been here for 10 years and are forced to be deported because they cannot get their permanent residence because of the highly competitive spots. Even in Manitoba, the workers, there are tens of thousands of workers. And you see them at the legislative protesting. There are tens of thousands of workers who are fighting for 6,000 spots because the government, the Canadian government, has reduced the intake amount for workers, migrant workers, because of the accusations that the migrant workers are causing all the problems that we're facing right now.
Any last questions or comments? Oh, this is very
Can we have questions to you
sure.
in terms of what are the specifics that CPJ is advocating for?
So
On migrant issues.
Yes. So CPJ, we work very much in coalition. So we're very much a part of the Canadian Council of Refugees and their work against Bill C-12. We work in the status for all as a key piece for us as well. And that's where foreign workers should be able to be recognized with status so that they are able to apply and get healthcare or get coverage. So those are the key. And then we were a key participant in because the federal government had a agreement with the provincial governments that asylum seekers would be incarcerated in provincial jails. And so we worked a lot with working against that, bringing that to public awareness was a key piece, and we were key in having a letter by faith leaders, multiple faith leaders come together, and so all of the provinces rescinded that then, and they didn't renew it. But then in the latest budget, I think it was before the latest election, though, in the budget, then the federal government was just going to build more prisons so that they could put them into federal prisons rather than provincial. So we work a lot at trying to help the government understand there's a lot of good program happening already. Things like Romero House, or where newcomers are being helped. And so rather than trying to reinvent the wheel, why don't you invest into those organizations that are already doing a good, effective job and increase that rather than certainly building jails or trying to come up with new programs.
C-12, which parties voted for, which parties voted against, do you remember?
I don't offhand. Rena is online. Do you have an answer to that, Rena? Bill C-12, which parties voted for and which parties voted against, do you know?
There was a lot of pushback from multiple different parties. Say the Conservative Party, for example, had privacy concerns with the bill. It was an omnibus bill that contained a lot of different moving parts to it. So there's a lot of pushback from most of the other parties, but then it ended up moving through the Senate pretty easily. A lot of parties, opposition parties, as well as advocates, were asking that there would at least be amendments made to the bill before it was finally passed. But it went through without any amendments. So there were a lot of concerns by opposition parties, but ultimately in Senate it moved through pretty easily.
Thank you.
That's Rena Namago, who is our refugee and migrant rights policy analyst. Putting all these events together. All right, well, thank you for being here. Thanks. Let's thank Dua again for an excellent presentation. Feel free here in the room. There's some more food there yet because whatever doesn't get eaten, I'm not sure what happens to it. So do eat it. And if you haven't got your copy of the book, we have that available for you here to purchase. Thank you online. Appreciate your presence with us. And if you want to find out more about CPJ, cpj.ca, and you can find all sorts of information and resources available. And Migrante, Manitoba.ca, will that do it?
Migrante.ca.
Migrante.ca. So thank you again. Appreciate your presence and input. And yeah, thanks for being a part of this important message.